and welcome to another episode of FooBar. In today's episode, I'm chatting with Ben Ellerby about the challenges that organizations face when they are going serverless. If you want to know more about serverless, cloud computing, or software engineer practices in general, subscribe to my channel in the red button below. I post two videos every week. So let's get started. This is another episode in my series, This is Not a Podcast. In this episode, I'm talking with Ben Ellerby about what are the challenges that organizations face when moving to serverless. We have a really interesting talk about architecture, and also at the end he shows us one tool that can help a lot. So let's get to the interview. So hello and welcome. Today I have a very special guest called Ben Ellerby. He is the VP of Engineering at Theodo, and he's also an AWS hero, a serverless hero, as I was in my old times. So I'm super excited to have you here today. Ben, how are you doing?
Yeah, really well, thanks. How about you?
I'm good. I'm super happy to have you here so we can chat about how companies can adopt serverless. I think it's a super exciting topic and you might have a lot to say. But first, I would like to talk a little bit about you and what you're up to, and I don't know, what you want to share with us.
Sure, yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm the VP of Engineering at Theodo. We're a company that help other companies launch digital products and more using serverless. So we have about almost 300 engineers around the world, so in London, Paris, and New York, and also Casablanca. And more we're spreading serverless across the company and with our clients. And I'm helping lead that charge by helping us have good practices around how we're doing serverless and also helping our clients adopt it. So I've seen a lot of how our teams adopted serverless, but also every week I'm dealing with new teams from our clients and how we help them adopt serverless.
That sounds really interesting. So I think you have a lot to say in today's topic.
We'll see.
And what is your experience about being a serverless hero? How long have you been one?
Yes, that was at the start of this year. I actually found out when I was speaking at Serverless Days Nashville, so that was a nice correlation. And I saw James Beswick there from AWS and a couple of others and Jeremy Daly. So it was nice to sort of find out it was some good company. And since then even before then, I've been doing a lot in terms of the serverless community. Luckily, Theodo allows me to spend time working in open source, helping to produce content. We have a serverless transformation effort, which is an open source effort about sharing best practices, use cases, and tooling for serverless. So if you go to serverless-transformation.com, and I'm sure we'll put it in the show notes.
All the links, you can do this like
Perfect.
All YouTubers.
Okay, they're all down there. That has articles from our architects about what we're doing with our clients. It has best practices from the community and also links to the open source tooling that we're building. Specifically, we have a team at the minute building sls-dev-tools, which is a project to help people adopting serverless and working with serverless architectures. And that's being built with developers at Theodo, but it's also involving a lot of the serverless community as another open source
And
effort.
we will talk about that today at the end of this chat. So I think people will stay tuned and see that tool in action. So I think the serverless community is one of the most amazing communities I've been part of. It's extremely active and all the heroes are amazing people. So welcome to the family. I'm still part of the family, even if they remove my title. I'm really happy that you're part of this group, and sure, you need to be very active contributors to be a hero. That's a question I get quite often. How you become a hero? By putting a lot of work and by doing a lot of work because you love to do the work, not because nobody is forcing you. So just doing this because you're passionate about spreading the love of serverless, and I'm really happy that people are taking the time to do this, because the more we are, the more people get in this boat.
And it's a really friendly community for anyone looking to get involved. Like, anyone is really open to getting messaged and helping you, even if it's in terms of content, everyone's helping you try and get stuff out there.
Yeah, for me, that's something that I love from the serverless community, because, well, I'm a woman and I'm quite young if you compare sometimes with the architects that are 40-something. So for me, getting into sometimes in a more like architecture talks in other communities was very hard and daunting. But for the serverless, everybody, even if I was just starting or I was just very new at the beginning, people were very open and really welcomed me and not really treat me different just because I was younger. and I think that was amazing for me and allowed me to develop and grow my career in this path. And I think the community has so much to do with it. So I encourage everybody to be part of these communities. A very, very open place. And I think Farah Campbell talks a lot about this.
Yeah, she does.
So if you don't know who is she, I will leave her the link. She's another of our serverless heroes, and she's amazing. So let's start talking a little bit about the challenges that companies have when they're starting to adopt serverless. What you have seen in your experience?
Yeah, so it's a big space. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, and it's also a moving target. So when you ask what serverless is, you get different answers, and people give you different answers in 2 years, and they will give you different answers 2 years ago. And I think that's the big challenge, because you say, okay, it's a framework, okay, it's Lambda, okay, it's using third parties, it's doing all of these things. It's quite confusing, and AWS keeps fixing problems, which is useful. But then that means we have to learn Eventbridge, and we have to learn RDS proxy, and we have to forget what we thought about putting Lambdas inside of VPCs. And as problems get solved, there's new things to learn, and the community is working really fast to build best practices. But that means a lot of reading to keep up. Yeah. So I think it's, the space, the size of the space, how fast it's moving, and just the emergent best practices. It keeps getting better, but you have to keep learning.
Yeah, that's something I discuss a lot with people that are coming from a more traditional environment, that when you are moving from on-premise to virtualization to containers, you keep the same mentality when you're building your applications. There is not really a big jump. But when you're moving to serverless, you have to break everything you know about building applications and how you organize them into a totally different new monster that it's kind of very scary for companies to adopt and for developers to get on that boat if they are not very familiar with the technologies of distributed systems and event-driven architectures.
And no one knows they're doing it correctly. No. Because there aren't a huge amount of examples out there, because although people are using it, it's a lot of work to make that understand about how people are using it, and also people change. Yeah. So great companies like Lego are very open about how they're using things like Eventbridge, which helps us sort of show that this does work, but also helps us validate our own reasoning.
And Eventbridge has like less than a year. So yes. It's like, we will talk about what Eventbridge is in a moment, but it's just a very revolutionary way of doing serverless application, but it doesn't get a year. It was launched in July last year. So it's in diapers.
Of course. And teams need to be building stuff. When you talk to companies who aren't necessarily tech companies, but companies that use tech, their development teams are under huge pressure to get things out, and they can't necessarily... I mean, even reading Jeremy Daly's newsletter takes an afternoon.
Yeah, so, I don't know how much time he spends writing that, because it takes forever to read.
Yeah. So I think that's also the fear. Like, do we know if we're doing it right? How much time are engineers going to just spend keeping up to date with this? And how do we plan and measure the effort it's going to take to upskill our developers? Because there's a huge cost, and there are new resources coming out. And Ant Stanley's launched a whole company around trying to help people get education around serverless, with people like Jan helping out. And we're trying to produce open source content, and everyone's trying to help, but there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, and I think in order to, at least in my experience of building serverless applications, in order to do serverless applications right or maintainable in the future, you really need to have good architecture practices and understand distributed systems that sometimes there are problems in small-scale companies that never arise before. You just put something in a container and it works, and then you move to serverless with the same load and the same amount of users, and you have totally new different problems that they are maybe not extremely hard to solve, but if you never saw those problems before, because they are about how you manage events or how you manage like services connecting and timing out and latencies and all these kind of things, it can be very, very scary, and asynchronous and all these things that, for example, I was a Java developer, and for me, going to this world of asynchronous applications, it blew my mind. It was so hard to get a grasp on how to build applications that were totally asynchronous. So,
and all of this, we should say, comes with it, gets rid of a lot of the other problems that you have already. So it's not as if we're just creating problems, they're just different problems.
Exactly.
And the return on investment that we've seen in companies is high, not just from the running cost, but the speed of the teams and the size of the teams that you need. But the problems that you have are different, and that's scary when you're trying to move a big company towards adoption.
Definitely. And I think one of the biggest challenges is Dynamo. That's something that everybody's like, yes, Dynamo is perfect for serverless applications, and everybody gets really happy. And then when they start looking at it, then they get, oh my God. So what is your take on that?
Yeah, it's one of the biggest challenges I see with, first of all, when it was working with my teams to adopt serverless, and then adopting serverless with our clients, because we're all very used to SQL. I did computer science. I thought I knew everything about relational databases. Obviously, I didn't. And NoSQL was a useful tool now and again, but it wasn't what I was necessarily using all the time. And we did a lot with Django, which is a Python framework for building web applications. And it has a great ORM, and it also has a great admin interface that comes out the box when you build out your application. So we had to leave all that behind, and also our theory about how to optimize joins and indexes. Like, we have a huge amount of learning and knowledge there, and move to something new which we had to learn, and something which I think has a bit of a bad reputation. I think people think it's just a key value store when we talk about DynamoDB, but it's not, and you can build amazingly powerful applications, but you have to build them differently again.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, for me at least, when I started adopting Dynamo, I learned in university that NoSQL databases didn't have a relations. They were schema-less, they were very flexible, and you could do whatever you wanted. And when you start working with Dynamo, you realize there are relations, and they're not flexible at all. Actually, they're even less flexible than SQL, but they're extremely performant. And that's the part that we want to, when we are building these serverless applications with infinite amount of scalability, we want to work on the really performant part. But I didn't know that. I thought they were magically and super flexible, and then you start putting things in a table, and then you realize that you want to add something else, you need to do crazy migrations of data, and it becomes very, very painful. And now I want to select all. Good luck with that.
Yes. And Rick Houlihan's talk is amazing, but it takes a long time to understand. Yeah. And you have to watch it at very slow speed, I find.
I watch it like 20 million times. For me, it was the revelation talk for Dynamo. And I have made a whole series of videos of that. And I will leave the video for Rick in the description box, because if you have not watched it, you need to go stop this and go and watch that, because
it's an experience. And Alex Debris, the data hero, he recently released his book, and it's one of the best resources for DynamoDB out there. Yes. So I definitely recommend that as well.
Exactly, extremely complete with a lot of examples and things like that. So I think those are the two best sources of information from Dynamo nowadays. But it's again a change of paradigm.
Exactly, and it's not something you can learn by reading. It's not something you can just learn by reading. You have to play around with it and start with it. And that's something for our clients that are, actually for all our clients now, when we're using a serverless architecture, which is most of our clients, when they start, we need to think about the database schema more than we had to in the past.
Oh, yeah.
So we've invented, as part of our methodology now, a DynamoDB workshop, which Rob Cronin, one of our architects, has made, and I'm sure he'll be writing about soon. But that's we've changed our methodology based off DynamoDB, which isn't something, our methodology doesn't change too much. It's like classic Scrum. But we've changed it around a bit to deal with the DynamoDB complexity. But it solves so many other problems, and we have CI pipelines that are creating whole stacks for a pull request in less than 5 minutes, and running end-to-end tests in less than 6 minutes. We're doing crazy things with the stack flexibility we get, and the cost of running for our clients is so low. But it's a change of mindset and a change of approach needed to fully get the benefit from DynamoDB. Yeah. And that's where we talked about earlier what the challenges to using serverless are. A lot of it is education, as we talked about.
Definitely.
But education needs guidance, because there's just so much out there. So I think with our clients, what we're seeing is providing the guidance, and specifically with DynamoDB, providing hands-on guidance with building their schema out with them, but also to help them understand what it will look like as their application starts to mature. and what they need to do, for instance, when their schema changes. Is that something they can manage? We need to show that it is something they can manage and go through that journey with them. So yeah, guidance, I think, is the key part in the education side.
Definitely. And I think in here it's good to practice some of the things that we learn, for example, from chaos engineering, that is to break things, but maybe not only breaking things, but thinking about migrations and changes and practicing those things. Because in the past, we were so used to migrating SQL databases. We have practice on doing that. We have practices on adding fields and schemas and changing things. It's something we have done a lot because we have a lot of experience. But then when we come to this new word, it's new. And then the moment we want to add a field, we might spend 2 months working on how the hell we do this. Let's move back to SQL. This is first time. Yeah, so I totally feel the pain. I've been there so badly with my team. So Dynamo, and serverless work very well together. They come with a lot of benefits, but again, I think you need to do serverless right in order to get the benefits. If not, you just only get the pains. And that's something a lot of people like. Serverless is not for me. It's not right for me. I have tried it and it didn't work. And I think in a lot of cases is that they just were not educated correctly and help correctly, as you said.
And the other thing to mention is right now, I still don't think serverless works well with a relational database.
No.
You can integrate relational databases in those weird, odd cases where you need to, but largely, if you want to do serverless first, you need to learn Dynamo.
Yeah.
That's the key message that I tell all of our clients, to be honest.
Yeah, because I think even Aurora is not perfect yet for handling these serverless computations, and I think Dynamo is designed perfectly. The integration between Lambda and Dynamo is so natural that whenever you try to integrate a relational database, it just hurts because it's so much work. If you compare when you are doing a call to Dynamo, it's like so easy, so simple, so clean, adding permissions, everything is tiny and minimal, and then you want to integrate with a relational database, and there's so much work that you need to do in order to get that up and running. So it's something, yes, definitely. I think people need to learn how to change to Dynamo, and it's painful because data is one of the most precious things for people, and
Yes.
and moving databases is scary. So how you will say developers can get started with serverless? We talk about the challenges. There's quite many.
Yes. Well, as developers and as organizations, in terms of developers, like any technology, I think it's key to just try it. Make a small project on a weekend or whenever. And the website Serverless Stack gives a very good example of using the serverless framework and building out sort of a React single page application with Cognito and API Gateway and Lambda. And it's a really good grounding in the different services and what they can look like coming together. So that really helps you start to understand. And obviously SAM is also great, and there are different solutions for the infrastructure as code side. And I don't, to be honest, I think you just need to choose one of them. I'm not sure there's a winner there, but you just need to.
I don't think so. The important one is that you have one.
Yes, don't use multiple. It's a good message.
Yeah, or don't use any, because some people just start by creating a Lambda from the console. And I would recommend start by picking an infrastructure as code framework, because that will make your life so much easier. At least my experience in the AWS console is more scary than using, if you're a developer, failing with code might feel more easy and natural than going to the AWS console and see all the options and all the things that you might not need right away, because in the AWS Lambda console there is like 2 million boxes that for a beginner person getting started, they don't need to know about provision concurrency, destinations, timeouts. Just go and build a hello world. It's in code is 20 lines of infrastructure as code.
And things like CDK are making it even more natural. You might not have done infrastructure as code.
Exactly. Is cool. So just pick one, but pick one.
And then in terms of organizations adopting serverless and the developers of those organizations, I think the key thing is to find, when we talk about large organizations, is to find one part that you can move to serverless on its own. With a lot of clients, we've ended up moving things like PDF generation. So a lot of clients have some legacy system that at some point generates a PDF of an invoice and it's slow and they need to upgrade the runtime. There are security issues because they've not touched it in 20 years. We work with them to move that into Lambda. So there's some great libraries around running Puppeteer and things like that inside of Lambda. moving something that's a job and feels a bit event-driven, and you can do things like, and that's going to go into S3, and now we can parallelize, so we get rid of the queue you had before your PDF generator.
And it's not really affecting your customers in a way that if you break it, it's not like a big deal.
You're not changing the homepage.
Exactly.
What we do there is we prove that serverless works for their team and their context, because I think serverless works for most applications and most teams, but they need to see it happening, and you need to take them on that journey. So choose a small part, moving that to serverless, and then think about how you're going to re-architecture everything. But don't paralyze yourself with figuring out the best tools to use and the perfect re-architecture, and then do a big sort of waterfall style project to do that. Pick a small part, move that, think about where you want to get to, and then sort of strangle that infrastructure gradually, shifting more of it to a serverless first approach.
Definitely. One way that I saw work many times for migrating to serverless is to start by picking few projects, like you said, first the PDF generation, then something other small that is kind of not really crucial, and to gain confidence and to become better. And also, when you start your change to anything, you have to pick some tools, and you need to test them, and you need to get familiar, so you can do your test of the tools, you can get the team more confident and inspired, and then you can start moving the critical things. So you don't leave the critical things for the end, because you might never arrive there. But after maybe X amount of projects, then you are ready to, okay, now we will move the shebang of our company, whatever is bringing us the money, but now we have done it for the last 2 years. We are trained, we are confident, and we know our tools very well, and we are all buying this serverless movement, and that works. And as you said, strangle it.
And the other thing is, like, I'm thinking of one particular client in London that we've worked with. They're a large media consultancy, and they have a legacy system written in PHP over a decade ago, and it's huge. And we've been working with them to rebuild that. Actually, their team were PHP developers, and they wanted to keep with PHP, but they wanted to use serverless, so it uses a custom runtime, which actually works really well.
Wow.
I'm not a great fan of PHP personally, but it's code at the end of the day. But running it's fine, so we have quite a few PHP lambdas in production.
Wow.
Yeah, it's fun. But in that migration, so yeah, we're gradually shifting that, but that doesn't mean you don't get the benefits for the business early on. They were able to pivot and do massive new features for the business requirements, and those new features were serverless first, because we'd put in those bits, it integrated with their existing authentication system and the key parts it needed to. We were slowly migrating everything, but their team could build the new data analytics part, or the new push notifications to customers, stuff they'd never done before, extremely quickly using serverless. So you can meet the needs of the business, but you can also handle your technical debt, and you can do those simultaneously, rather than saying, let's move everything to serverless and then start doing new stuff.
And that doesn't work in the realistic world, because your customers and your stakeholders don't care which technology you're running. They just want to see features, and they want to see value at the end of the day. So you cannot stop all your developers for 1 year to do a migration.
But you can show the AWS bill going down, hopefully, as well. That's the other benefits.
I hope. And how you will recommend to train your developers? Because I think we mentioned many times that education is an important thing, and I think training in the organization is like a big cornerstone of adopting serverless. So do you have some ideas or some good practices?
Yes, we have a number of different clients that come to us. We have, startups who want to get their MVP out quickly and don't have a technical team, and we'll build that out quickly, these days using serverless, and sometimes help them then hire and build a team. We work with mature startups, or startups that have a technical team, and from day one, and this even works in large organizations too, we embed our team with their team, sort of a 50-50 split. Because we find, the occasional workshop is useful, but sending someone on a 3-week course to listen to somebody talk about cognito identity pools doesn't work. You need to be pair programming half of your day every day for a few weeks, working with the team. The great thing with serverless is with infrastructure as code, you can automate so many best practices. And when we take a microservice architecture and an event-driven architecture, you can help them build out the first microservice, and they can copy-paste that and build the next one with all the best practices that they had before. So yeah, we help them use the best tooling. We pair program with them. And I think you need somebody experienced, don't necessarily need, but it helps to have somebody experienced, who's tried different stuff and has a selection of tools they think work best. Get them to sort of help you build out initially, obviously feeding in your own ideas about what tooling you want to use, build that out together. So having that guidance and that hands-on experience. And the other thing that comes with that is the automation of best practices is something we've always found important in our company. So we build different projects for different people. And therefore, for every technology that we use, we have an internal project generator that all of our architects and developers contribute to. So we fix a bug in one project, we'll go back to that internal project generator and make sure JDBT validation is always done a certain way. And with serverless, I'm responsible for trying to pull our architects to contribute and improve our serverless architecture. But as it's infrastructure as code, we can automate some of those best practices. And what we've been doing even more recently is with sls-dev-tools, the tool we'll show later on, we now have an extension to that called sls-dev-tools Guardian, which is a CI tool that runs over your infrastructure and checks for best practices automatically. Wow. So things like your Lambda function has its memory left as the default memory allocation. That can impact the performance and also the cost of your infrastructure. When you're new to serverless, you don't really know you need to change that, and you might start not knowing why it's stopping. So this tool will go over and check automatically the best practices, a bit like ESLint does for JavaScript.
Yeah, nice.
With a rule page that says, why is this a bad thing? But also, what can you do to fix it? So it links to things like Lambda power tuning and different tools you can use to fix your problems, well, a sort of a step-by-step guide of improving it. So I think it's hands-on training, education, as we've been saying, but also automatic best practice checks.
That sounds really, really powerful, because when you see the results in your, after your build process is done, then you can go and take an action. And I think that's the way to learn. If you get that message and you get an explanation and you get how to fix it, then developers might not do it again, because in most of the cases is that they didn't know what you were doing.
Yeah, of course.
So
and even when you know what you're doing, you can make mistakes, right?
Sure, but a lot of the times is when learning something new, you just basically doing things without, it works.
Yes.
But one thing is that it works, and the other thing is that it's the best way that it can work. So I think it's really good that there is some tool for best practices, because serverless, I think now we are getting to a maturity that we can collect best practices. Before we didn't know, I think, what could work and not, and I think now at least we have a more clear view on what works and what not. And when we were discussing before this meeting, you talk about building reusable serverless components in the organization, and I think that's super important, because the copy-paste and reusing things, it's something, it's the amazing thing of serverless, because you have these Lego boxes that you can put together. So maybe you can talk a little bit more on how you implemented that.
Sure, yeah. So in terms of reusable components in our organization, we're very big on lean management. So really trying to standardize things. What is the best possible way to, let's go back to generating a PDF, what's the best possible way to configure an IAM policy rather than S3 bucket? With other technologies, that was standardized in internal wikis and also sometimes as infrastructure as code. But with serverless, we can really just have a repository of this is a best practice for doing a PDF generation, IAM policies embedded, all the best practices about doing blue-green deployments of step functions, like really trying to automate all of that, which is powerful for our teams. But what we need to do is help our clients in the larger organizations build the culture themselves of doing that, because there's going to be new services that come out. There's going to be new best practices. They're going to learn what works for them and what doesn't, and they need to start doing that. And whether that's using something like serverless components, which is still quite new and people are starting to adopt, or whether that's just even doing as simple as with the serverless framework, making a small repository that says just as PDF generation, and then having a good documentation of all those repository examples, and people can just git clone them down, change what they need to change, or copy paste what they need to copy paste across to their other project.
Have you tried the serverless application repository from AWS?
Yes, we played around with it a bit, and I like the fact that that can also be more public. And people can share those around.
There is like 3 levels: the one that is private, then the one that is like protected inside some kind of organization or AWS account, and then the one that is public that you can share with the world. And I kind of really like the idea that you can nest these applications and have them all composed together. So.
And I think there's a cool future for maybe things like you need to integrate with a third party like Stripe. Obviously, things like Eventbridge, which we'll talk about later, might help with that. But Stripe could also provide you a serverless template via SAR or via GitHub or whatever to say, look, if you need to build a payment microservice integrated with Stripe, replace this token here in SSM to be your Stripe token. And then this is going to trigger all the events in your architecture that you need. There's really cool stuff that third parties can do to make it easier for adoption as well.
Exactly, and I think that's something I notice a lot when I have this huge GitHub repository of projects that I build for my YouTube channel, but I also use it a lot for my own projects because it's a lot of copy pasting. I want to define an Eventbridge. It's infrastructure as code. You basically copy it and you just change the environmental variable and voila, it works. And you can do that for the code, the connections to the different services. So I think it's a great way to keep the knowledge around the company and how you manage dependencies, or like how you, for example, you were mentioning that when you find the best practice, you have to go to your repository and change it. Is there a way that you can cascade all the changes to all the different projects using, like, I don't know, the PDF generator? Now there is a new way of doing it, or you need to go inside of each of them and...
Yeah, so the project teams and the clients, their code is their code. So in terms of, it becomes a bit complicated about how we do that, but that's kind of in terms of our education and knowledge sharing. So we use tools from lean manufacturing, like A3, which is like a visual way of solving problems and documenting best practices. We update our internal repositories, which are sort of showing examples, and our project generators. And we have interesting conversations, which I think is the important part. We don't just go in and change the code. We make a pull request, and then you have 20 other architects around the world commenting on it, telling you why you're wrong or why you're right, or you have a really interesting conversation. And then the third part is we set up in our company, but we also try and help our clients set up guilds around different subjects. So security, performance, scalability, but we also have one dedicated just to serverless, where every week architects from around the world in our company, and sometimes from our clients, meet and discuss what they've learned this week, what they've improved this week. So it's really that building that culture of knowledge sharing, which I've not listened to Jeremy Daly's serverless chats episode this week, but I think that's the topic. I think that's the culture, building a serverless development culture, and that's really around knowledge sharing when it comes to our teams and our clients' teams.
And I think because of the way serverless is built, you empower everybody in the company. It's not that like it's very pyramidal, but the developers have a lot of power, so it's good to have these open communications and people feel safe to make mistakes, and to like building a culture in an organization that can adopt serverless is not as simple as just let's use serverless.
Exactly. And I think that's why serverless is so scary to people learning it, is that it is so empowering. Beforehand, like a developer might be full stack, they might work on the front end, they might work on the back end, but there's probably an ops team somewhere, or they might have called themselves a DevOps team somewhere that were helping them by, building out the Docker images, but the developer wasn't necessarily able to just change their own IAM policy in some organizations. But now the developers got access to the whole stack, front end, back end, infrastructure as code, CI/CD. It's increased what we need to know, but it's also empowered us to be able to make those sweeping changes across the whole stack.
Yeah. And I think one thing that scares a lot management is the teaching people about cloud economics, because before nobody knew how much your application were costing and how your different decisions will impact on the cost of your applications. But now, because the developers are so close to the cloud, they can take very different decisions and really impact on the cost of the application, and they need to understand how the application, how the cloud work, and how different service behaves, and which are the best options. So there is also a lot of things related to the cloud economics that I never had to worry before when I was a developer of traditional applications in containers.
Definitely, and the first change we made when we moved to serverless, we were already using AWS organizations, but we made sure that every developer could access the billing page, because they need to know. Like beforehand, it often wasn't in their permissions because they didn't probably care, but also that was the billing person's job. Yeah. But now every developer needs to know how much they spent on S3 the last month, because maybe their new code has a loop that's doing something expensive.
Exactly.
They're changing timeout, whatever it is.
And depending on, for example, what kind of application you're using, you might benefit from Eventbridge or from Kinesis or from another messaging tool. So you need to understand what you're building and how your application behaves and how much it costs. I think it's something people need to change to the new ways, and it changes always scary and painful, and you need to help people go through the journey together and remove the pain of fear and failure. I think that's something a lot of companies still are blaming people for mistakes, and I think that's something that doesn't work when you are really changing the paradigms and how people are need to adopt to something totally new. But one topic I would like to cover is Eventbridge. You mentioned it like 20 million times during this this talk, and it's one of my favorite services. So I will definitely would like to know your take on how companies can benefit from Eventbridge.
Sure, and I guess for anyone not familiar, Eventbridge is a way of sort of doing microservice communication in serverless architectures. So you can have event buses. So it's very much off CloudWatch events. There's a default event bus, which is all the different AWS events that are happening when an EC2 server starts or when an EC2 server stops, or a user authenticates with Cognito. All those different events can go around. But there's also other event buses, which can be custom. So your own application can create its own event bus. It's a bit like going back to the enterprise service bus, you guys remember that, where you have the ability to send events through a centralized bus. And it enables you to sort of think in a much more event-driven way, but also it deals with a lot of the pain of integrating microservices that was around before. And then the final part is that third-party services can also push events into your architecture, which is sometimes overlooked, but is super powerful when you think with Zendesk, when someone raises a customer support ticket, you can have a Lambda function that automatically sends an email to the right person or whatever it is. You can really start building really integrated systems very quickly. What we use it for generally at Theodo and with our clients is the microservice communication element, being able to build serverless microservices quickly and with best practices and tooling from day one. There's a misconception, I think, sometimes when we talk about serverless, that a Lambda function is a microservice. No. It's really not. It's a microservice. If we go back to service-oriented architectures, a service is trying to achieve some common goal, and it's a collection of resources doing that. And building out that might be one microservice might just be step functions with a DynamoDB table. Another might be some Lambda functions, Cognito, DynamoDB step functions, and SQS. Different logical collections of things. But the important part to try and do it well is to try and avoid the interconnections between those. You don't want your user service to call 3 other microservices before it can add a new user. No. Because, you build a distributed monolith, which I think a lot of people who've done serverless in the past sometimes slipped into that trap of doing the distributed monolith.
Because it's the way that we are used to think, like the synchronous way, step by step.
And that's the rule. A rule I have in a lot of our architectures is a Lambda function doesn't call another Lambda function via HTTP or directly.
And it's kind of funny because I have so many questions every time I say a Lambda function doesn't call a Lambda function, and people are like, why? Well, no, you don't do that. You can do it. It's physically possible, but you don't do it. You are coupling 2 different business logic parts that you don't want to do that. You want to put a queue in the middle. You want to distribute the load.
Exactly. And ThoughtWorks, I think, came out with a nice name for this, which being the Lambda pinball. So a request comes in, it bounces around like a pinball machine in an arcade. So a request comes in, it will bounce around 6 Lambda functions, go through an SQS through a step function, and then, into SNS, and then trigger a Lambda function. It's very hard to know where the request is going to go, to reason about it, to test it, but to have visibility is almost impossible.
Yeah, and I think that comes a lot from the concept that Lambda function needs to do one thing and one thing only, and people take it literally, that it needs to be like a function in a coding project that does one thing. And no, it can do one thing and one thing only, but needs to do one thing, bigger thing. So it's very hard to describe what is the level of abstraction of that thing that it needs to do, because then it's like, well, you don't want to put 20 different actions inside a Lambda function. So what is the level of amount of things, granularity that Lambda function can do? Because it doesn't make sense, and also because you get billed by 100 milliseconds, so you don't want your Lambda function to execute for 2 milliseconds and then bounce to another and then bounce to another and then bounce to another. It's just save something in S3 and in Dynamo. It's just like all together.
And there's also that focus on Lambda so much when you can do crazy things without Lambda. Which I think James Beswick's blog series, I think S3 to, I can't remember what the name of the series is, but basically just shows how you can do so much without Lambda at all with the serverless architecture. Back to Eventbridge. So I was mentioning we sort of structure as services in this microservice architecture. The first workshop I run with teams who are doing serverless and doing serverless microservices is something called Eventbridge Storming, which is a workshop that we've sort of created from the domain-driven design idea of event storming. So domain-driven design is like a very mature set of different tools and techniques for building great systems. It's a very big area and quite hard to master. But if you take one part of it, which is event storming, it's an extension of domain-driven design that helps you define your systems and their boundaries based off the events that go through your system. We've expanded that and applied it specifically to Eventbridge. So we have a workshop that takes half a day or more at the start of our projects, or even more regularly than that, where we bring in business stakeholders, end users, and the engineering team into a big room, or these days, a big virtual whiteboard. And then we lay out all the events of the system in English, in business understandable terms, and in the past tense. So we say order placed, item shipped, refund made, help ticket raised. We just, for the first part, is just letting people throw them all over the whiteboard or the virtual whiteboard, and it's a bit of chaos. We then start to group those together, well, actually not group them together, but put them into time sequence and remove the duplicates. So we start to understand what happens before what, and then figure out what the entities are. We have this concept of a user, this concept of an order, and sometimes the logical inconsistencies that one department might have a concept of an order being a return, but another person thinks an order is a command that comes from a help desk system, and another person says an order is an order placed by a user. And you start to figure out those boundaries in your system. They call them bounded contexts in domain-driven design, which is the domain in which a term can be used ubiquitously, basically where your language can be common. Those bounded contexts are the first set of grouping that help us then move on and figure out our microservices. And one bounded context, which we kind of draw a big circle around all those post-it notes we talked about before, that can be several different microservices. But the important thing to note, if an entity exists in more than one of those bounded contexts, let's say orders are manipulated by the sales processing team, but also by the marketing team, it's not necessarily one microsystem that's going to deal with that. It's probably going to be two microsystems, and there might be some data duplication.
Yes.
But things like data
how you manage the shared data, because I think that's something always confusing with microservices. And for example, in the case that you said, two microservices need to access the same data. In my thinking, when I'm working with microservices, I always try to make the data private to one microservice, and then the other one needs to connect through an API. What is your take on this?
Yeah, it's a super complicated one, and it's still one that it depends on the context, and it's something the teams need to figure out how they want to manage. But my general rule is we split these microservices. We should come back to Eventbridge. We split these microservices. We then figure out the schema, so the structure of the events that goes between them. But let's say we have the example of a sales team and a marketing team. Let's say the sales team, obviously, when an order is placed, they need to start processing some finance data. And the marketing team might want to make sure that 2 weeks after the order is placed, you send a survey email that says, how did you find your service last week? One event will come through that event bus saying order placed with the data about that event. And the schema and things like the Eventbridge schema registry is super useful here, will have all the data that needs. Both services can listen to that. So the sales team can listen to the order placed and record the attributes and the structure and the data access patterns that they need. The marketing team can do the same. So the rule that I have generally with microservices is that they master their own data. So we shouldn't share a database, but also we should reduce dependencies between them. There is some data that has to be sort of stored in one place because it needs transactional consistency.
Exactly.
But stuff like the marketing team sending a survey email later on doesn't necessarily need transactional
and
consistency.
it's totally different data that the marketing team than the sales team will store. So you might duplicate the order ID and something small, but at the end of the day, the bulk of the data is very different. So I think that's something we come from SQL, and we come from these big tables that are full of fields. And then again, thinking on NoSQL matters, you want to make your data local to the problem that you're trying to solve. It's easier to manage, and it's easier to have it in one table design and things.
And yeah, I'm definitely a proponent of one table design, but the important thing here is those two microservices had different databases.
Yeah, exactly.
It wasn't
totally
multi-table
different
design, just different databases. One could have been in SQL or in MongoDB, you don't know. but you don't care. You're just triggering events, and they can listen to them and do what they need to do. And that's how teams can be independent. It's the same thing as with code sharing. I've always, through my career, we're going to share as much code as possible and created complex patterns for us to like publish SDKs inside of companies. We don't duplicate business logic, but we do duplicate code these days, because those microservices are going to operate better if they're treated as microservices with separate teams. Those teams can go at a rate of agility that wouldn't be possible if they were making change requests to a central system and then the version of that SDK was updated across all the microservices. Really, one microservice should be responsible for the business rule, and they should implement it how they want to implement it. But things like code and data sharing are things we really need to get past if we're going to do event-driven microservices with asynchronicity.
Totally agree with that. I think it's like in some cases it really doesn't make sense to do code sharing. It's more the over-engineering work and all the extra management of the code than the saving of just duplicating that.
Yeah.
It's just like, do you have some good books or documents that you can share on this as event storming or blog posts that we can leave for the audience that you can share with me? Because I think that's something super important, and I really like the methodology that you describe for doing event storming, and I personally would like to know more about it.
Sure. Yes, that blog article is on the service transformation site, but I'll send you a link afterwards.
Yes, cool.
And we can put that directly here.
I can put it here. Yes, you're learning this. Yes. Because I think that's very, very interesting, and I'm a super fan of Eventbridge, and I would really like to do it better. So maybe we can move to a little demo, because this is not a podcast. We have a screen and you want to show something to us, and I like this hands-on part, so the audience can go and try something after they finish listening to this talk. And maybe you can tell a little bit more about the tool, and then we can share the screen.
Yeah, so the tool I want to demo today is sls-dev-tools, so serverless developer tools, which kind of aim to be the developer tools for building state-of-the-art serverless applications. So they're not a replacement for infrastructure as code tools like SAM or serverless, really complementary to those. And the kind of analogy I tend to use with teams is talking about Chrome dev tools. So I think a lot of us have had some experience at least of doing front-end development. And Chrome dev tools, when you inspect, you can see loads of different data about what's on the page, interact, run lighthouse audits and take different actions, and also see the console logs, a huge part of development. Yeah. We tried to make sls-dev-tools the same thing, but for serverless, because it really started one evening when we were in the basement of our office after work.
Such a startup.
Yeah, classic. And we were just sort of complaining about jumping to the AWS console when doing back-end development, because a lot of us, we've got tooling and an IDE and a terminal environment that we really like using. And when we're doing back-end development, I don't really want to jump to a web browser all the time.
And it's white and it hurts your eyes.
Yeah. There's not a dark theme yet for the AWS console. It's a big problem. So this is trying to be putting that feedback loop as close to the place where the work is done as possible. So it started off by just being able to see the logs for your Lambda functions in your terminal in an easily accessible way. Now, obviously, that's something that things like the serverless framework can do, where you can tail your logs. But we started to take it further than that by starting to see things like the duration of the last 5 calls to that Lambda function. So when you're developing, you write some new code that maybe calls a third party or something. You invoke it maybe in a developer stack or in staging or in production. But you can then see what the impact was to your duration. So we're tying developers to those metrics, but not giving them all the metrics of the CloudWatch dashboard, but targeted metrics that you should be paying attention to while you're developing. So we added that in. We added things like the ability to see the region you're deployed in and switch region to help remind us which region we're in. Sometimes we're coding.
It's so frustrating when you're looking for your logs and it's like, where it is? Oh, shit, I'm in the wrong region.
Exactly. And then we started saying, okay, we can see data, but there are some actions we want to take. I'm always deploying stacks. I'm always deploying Lambda functions. Rather than reverse searching for that command I ran last week, I want to just press D for deploy and S for stack deploy, and it will happen straight away.
Nice.
So we started to have some sort of optimization. Developers love key bindings.
Oh, yeah. Does it work with serverless framework or serverless framework on SAM? Or?
It works with serverless framework, SAM, and you can provide your own deployment command in a config file. So it works with most things that are based on CloudFormation, but it works with most things.
Awesome.
Then going past that, we started using a lot more Eventbridge. But Eventbridge is different to things like API gateway fronted Lambdas. We can't use Postman to hit our requests. We need to inject an event in. And that's where we started to build Eventbridge supports. So we can see all of our event buses, press I and get a form to directly just input an event in.
Oh.
But not only do that, interact with the Eventbridge schema registry, click an event, using the keyboard, tab to an event, hit enter, and then you get a form where you can fill in the price of the item, the order ID, the country of origin, whatever it is, hit submit, and it will inject that event directly into the Eventbridge. If you're watching the same Lambda function that's listening to that event, you'll then see the logs come out. So really changing that feedback loop, because it was developers were writing their own scripts to do the event injection. They were hacking something with the AWS SDK. Instead, we wanted to make it a developer-friendly tool and really improve that developer experience.
Like Postman for Eventbridge, and like that description, because I think everybody loves Postman.
Exactly. And then after that, we sort of moved into sls-dev-tools Guardian, which we released last week, which is that automated best practice audit, basically, of your architecture, which is designed to work on the CI rather than as a dashboard. And there's a new feature coming out this week, which is going to be called sls-dev-tools Relay.
And how you integrate that Guardian? You put it in your code build, for example, or in which part?
You can run it from the command line, but you can also add it into things like GitHub Actions or your Circle CI build or whatever it is. The only thing is it doesn't run off your configuration, it runs off your deployed resources. So for some of our projects, the build pipeline deploys the whole application to its own stack anyway as part of the end-to-end testing. So for those, it's very trivial to add this.
So can you, for example, if you're using, I don't know, code pipeline, you just create a Lambda that will run this, or?
Yeah, it's one command, it would run fine.
Okay.
But it just requires that as part of your build process, you're deploying somewhere before you deploy it to production.
Exactly. Like
or you can always do the check
staging.
after deployed, but
Yeah.
If you're deploying to a stage for that particular deployment, that's perfect.
Exactly.
I guess we should show the tool.
Yes.
All right, so let's have a look at the tool. It's probably looking a bit small for you to be able to see here right now, but I'm going to link a demo video so that later on you can have a proper look through, as we're going to open quite a big dashboard in a minute, and zooming in is going to be an issue with my screen size. But what I've done is I've done a yarn ad of sls-dev-tools. Oh, I can't type.
Typing is hard, don't worry.
Tools, thank you. And you can add this as a dependency, as a dev dependency. You can install it as a global dependency. I'm largely seeing teams install this as a dev dependency of their projects.
Okay.
Once you've installed that, you can run yarn sls-dev-tools. And I'm just reverse searching. If you run just yarn sls-dev-tools, it will open up a modal where you can select the region and the stack name. But here I'm providing the stack name with the -n option, giving it the name of a CloudFormation stack of someone in the team, -r for the region, and it will use our default AWS profile, but you can pass a different profile with the -- profile.
That's good, like any AWS CLI command.
Exactly. So if I run this, I'm going to be presented with a full screen dashboard. So here we're seeing the Lambda functions on the right-hand side. You might not be able to see too clearly here, so I'll link to a demo video. But if I open up one of those Lambda functions by pressing enter, we're going to see an invocation graph showing the history of invocations. In the center, the durations of the last 5 invocations, a cool map that shows where you deployed, but also lets you change region as you're working with multi-region deployments. In the bottom left, there's CloudWatch logs, which are hot reloading as the tool is running. And a feature we're releasing this week is something called sls-dev-tools Relay, which will allow you to, by pressing enter twice on one of the functions, enable Relay, which will be a different logging system. At the minute, CloudWatch can take 5 or 6 seconds to get the log out. This will allow you to get logs in less than 1 millisecond from deployed Lambda function in debug. It's doing this with a custom runtime and WebSockets. But to the user, all you do is press enter twice, wait about 20 seconds. Only the first time it takes a little while. And then that's constantly listening for logs at a high rate of speed. So you can change the code of your Lambda function. You can be debugging something, and you won't have the latency of 6 seconds. Instead, you'll see the logs instantly, and they even come back before the Lambda function finishes execution.
Wow, that's super cool.
Yeah, it's been a fun feature to build.
I imagine.
In the bottom right, we can see the event bridges, which we can tab to. If we go to Application Bridge and press I, we can then inject an event. So here we can see the name of the bridge, we can see the detail type, we can provide a source, a detail, and then press submit, and that will submit an event into the event bridge. Obviously, I didn't fill anything in there. the cool thing is we can also press R for the Eventbridge registry and see the different registries that we have. Actually, the Eventbridge schema registry isn't enabled in this region, so I'll have to change region.
And how you change region?
So you can change region with the map. I'm going to change quickly here by just running the command again.
Okay.
But if I tab down again and then tab to the map, what I can do is press the arrow key here, and you can see that I'm switching region. So you can then select an area to change to. You press enter, and then you'll switch region. Obviously, this stack name isn't deployed there, so I'm going to change back to the previous region. And there we go. We'll be in that region. If I tab again, we can go back down to the Eventbridges section. Open up this
everything is with the tab, basically. You move around the whole...
Different sections are navigated with the tab, and then there's different key bindings. If you get lost in the tool, you just press H for help, and you can see all the different key bindings and what they do.
Nice.
And I often find myself doing that.
I think it's quite normal because there is so many keys and commands always to remember for all the tools.
And then if I press R for the registry, I'll see the Eventbridge schema registries that are here. So the discovered schemas are the dynamically discovered event schemas from Eventbridge. So if I press enter here, based on the events that have gone through, it's going to know that we have an event called hello. I can press enter again, and hello doesn't actually have any content, so I'm going to exit that. But if I press that again, discovered schemas, and go to number test, I'm hoping this is going to have a number field, which it does, so I can enter.
And this is so much simpler than what you can see in the registry, because when you go there, there is a huge kind of JSON that looks very confusing, or what are the real fields. So I think this looks so much simpler to understand what the event is inputting.
Exactly. And then we can just press enter, and that will have populated the detail at the bottom to have those two fields. And you can have multi-page forms with complex fields. It's just a simple example. We then press submit, and that's going to submit the events into the Eventbridge and trigger the Lambda function. Okay. Those errors are from our changing of region beforehand. What else to show? If we tap back up here, I'm not going to run it because I've not got a serverless project in this directory, but if I did, I can press D to deploy the Lambda function, or S to do a full stack deploy. And in the same way as we injected events into Eventbridge, I can press I, and I can do a direct Lambda invocation of this Lambda function in the same way that we did for Eventbridge.
Nice. Yeah, that's a typical Lambda invocation that we have from SAM or serverless framework, I imagine. What we are used to. Yeah.
And if we exit the tool, the other thing we mentioned was the sls-dev-tools Guardian. So
that sounds super interesting.
If we run exactly the same command, but we put the --ci option, it's not going to open a dashboard, but instead it's going to run a Guardian audit across our resources. So it's going to tell us it's analyzed for default memory, default timeout, max memory, max timeouts, identical code, and shared roles. So it's quite a minimal set to start with. And it's open source, so people are adding them, and we're also adding them. It will tell you for those ones that are failing.
You can add your own rules for your own projects, I imagine. Like if you have an organization with specific rules, you can put new rules.
Yes, right now you'd have to fork the repo, but we're going to make it a bit easier to be able to provide rules as a config objects, basically.
Yeah, cool.
So you can see the ARNs of the failing resources, and also there's a link to a page, which if you open that page, will tell you why having default memory is a problem, and also tell you how to fix it. And that's the same for every rule. We'll have a page that explains the context and a next step to fix the issue.
That's so cool, because that's super important, not to say this is wrong, but to give a reason why.
Awesome. So that's sls-dev-tools. It's completely open source, built by the community. We're maintaining it at Theodo, and we're adding new features regularly. So any feedback on that is super welcome. Pull requests are also welcome. And feel free to check it out and let us know what you think.
Yeah, I will definitely put all the links in the description box. And I would like to know what is your favorite social media, so people can reach to you and ask you questions and talk to you if they want to.
Sure, I spend most of my time on Twitter. So at Ellerby Ben, which I guess we'll put in the notes below.
You can do it.
Down here, and LinkedIn as well. I'm around, but Twitter is probably the fastest way to get in touch.
Yes, I'm a super fan of Twitter, so I will leave that and also all the links that we mentioned today in the description box. Do you want to say something else, or?
Well, no, just thanks so much for having me. It's I really like the show. It's a really great resource. You've done a crazy number of videos. So, thanks so much, and thanks for having me.
You're welcome, and I'm super happy that you accepted my invitation. So thank you very much. and
Awesome.
have a great day.
You too.
This was the video for today. I hope you like it. If you did, give a big thumbs up. Thumbs up helps a lot to YouTube to know that you like my videos, and they should promote it. You know how algorithms works? Also, if you want me to interview someone in particular, let me know in the comment box below. I always looking forward to talk with people that are interesting for you or for the community. So just ping me in the comments. Also, if you have some topic you would like me to cover in these episodes, I can also find an expert on that matter. And I see you in the next episode of FooBar. Ciao, ciao!